Hello dear viewers, Jeff the Drummer here. Hey. Today I want to talk about a subject that I think a lot of people overlook, at least at the beginning of their career. I know I did. And that's networking. In any field where you're self-employed, you need to get out there and meet people and really make things happen. And networking is just one of those ways of trying to develop a network of contacts. There are lots of different ways to go about networking. These days you can do a lot of online, but you also still need to get out there and hit the pavement. One of the things I always tell people is to go to jam sessions. That's one of the best ways to meet new people. People are going to hear you play. So not only can you get up there and talk the talk, but you can walk the walk. And that's basically how I got started out here in Los Angeles. For those of you that don't know my background, I lived in Boston for 13 years, and basically I met people in a similar fashion. I went to jam sessions, got phone numbers, people heard me play, people started calling me for gigs, one thing led to another, and over the years I developed a pretty substantial network. And when I moved out of Boston, I probably knew almost all of the major players in that town, meaning the guys who worked the most and who were professionals and did it full time. And I also knew a lot of guys who did it part time. So when I got out here, I did know a bunch of people, but not a lot. And I had to go out there and go to the jam sessions and try to meet new people and exchange phone numbers, and people got to hear me play, and just like in Boston, things have built from there. Now, I've only been out here for a year and a half, but I have made a lot happen in that short amount of time, and that's due in no small part to my consistent attendance of jam sessions and following up with people, that sort of thing. But rather than just talk your ear off and try to, explore the really deep rabbit hole that is networking, I thought I would give you two different examples of what's happened to me in my career since I got out to LA that really kind of help exemplify both why it's important to get out consistently and network and meet new people, but also exemplify how connected this industry is. It's kind of incestual, as you'll see. So the first example I want to talk about is when I first got out here, my friend David Cowan, who's a great drummer, and I actually knew him from Boston. He'd been living out here for I think 5 or 6 years before I got out here, and luckily I'd kept in touch with him because he was just an invaluable resource. And if you're watching this, David, thank you so much. You really kind of got me going when I first got out here. And that should be a lesson to anybody else who decides to move to a new city. If you know somebody out there, really rely on that resource. Of course, give the value back to them when you have a chance. Once you have a bunch of gigs and you need a sub one night, call that guy. But when you first get out, get into a new town, if you know anybody at all, those are the guys you have to start hanging with, and really lean on them for a little while, and they're going to help you get started. So David Cowan really helped me get started. When I first got out to LA, he told me about all the jam sessions that most people attended. And so I went to this one jam session, and it was like a classic rock thing, a weekly session on Wednesday nights at this place called Petey's Place in Reseda. And I went there and met all the guys in the house band, great people, and got to sit in and play, and everything went great, had a nice hang, got to talk to everybody afterwards, exchange business cards, blah blah blah. The week after I went again, and once again I sat in, and at that point I'd known the guys, I'd met them the week before, so they recognized me, and that's kind of what you want. You want people to recognize you, you want there to be some sort of familiarity there, and that's why going to jam sessions consistently is what really makes it worthwhile. So anyway, after going to this jam session several times, I got a phone call from the leader of that band. This guy's name's David Keckett, and he's just awesome rock and roll singer, and he asked me if I wanted to be the house drummer because the drummer they were using wasn't available consistently, and he knew that I had just gotten into town, so he had assumed that my schedule was wide open, which it was, and so I graciously accepted. I started playing there every week. One of the guys in that band that I met is this guy Patrick Abate, who's an awesome rock and roll metal guitar player from Italy. He and I really hit it off. We had some long conversations and became friends. And after several months of doing that gig together, one day I was talking to him and he had mentioned how he wanted to start working on his solo record. And so I asked him, of course, if he needed a drummer, and also if he needed someone to help him with production, because I've done a lot of audio production as well. And so we agreed to start working together. Sorry for the beeping. It's rush hour right now here in LA, and I live right next to a major intersection. Anyway, so we agreed to start working together on his record. One thing about Patrick is he's been out here for quite a while, and he has a lot of contacts, he knows a lot of people. And so one thing he wanted to do was invite a bunch of his friends to play on the record. I managed to work with some great people, including Dion Estus, who's the bassist, or was the bassist for Wham, George Michael, I think he's played with Elton John, a slew of other people. I got to record several tracks with him. Patrick also was friends with Philip Bino, who is a bassist most well known with Steve Vai. He came and played on a track, so I got to play with him. And then the other big thing about that session was that it was produced by this guy named David Z. David Z has worked with Prince all through the 80s and early 90s. He produced most of Prince's work. He's also worked with several other 80s acts such as Aha and Fine Young Cannibals. Remember that song, She Drives Me Crazy? So I got to work with those guys amongst a lot of other great people on that session. So that was just one degree of separation from that first gig I got, the Wednesday night jam session. So just from getting that one jam session gig, I was able to get to studio work with Patrick, and I got to work with all those great people. One of the other people that I met on that gig was this guy, Clackers K. Clackers was the bass player on that gig, and he actually is a Berkeley alum like me, so we kind of connected on that level, and he's also from the East Coast like I am, so we connected on that level as well. It's all about connections and commonalities. Remember that. The more commonalities you have with somebody, the more you're going to be able to relate to one another, the stronger your connection and your friendship's going to be. He also plays with this band called Honky Stomp. Honky Stomp is like a hard rock country fusion kind of band, and I've been able to play a handful of gigs with them around town. And the cool thing about that is that on several of those gigs I was able to work with a fiddle player whose name is Jimbo Ross. Jimbo Ross is this session and live fiddle player who's been in LA forever. I think he's from here. He's played with a lot of people, including some appearances on American Idol. So it was great to work with a guy like that. That's a great contact that I continue to follow up with. And you know, one of the things that you should learn in terms of networking is you need to follow up with people consistently. I haven't worked with Jimbo outside of the realm of the Honky Stomp gig, but you never know. He might be called to do a session and they might need a drummer, and if I've just talked to him the day before, I'll be in the forefront of his mind and he'll be like, oh, call this guy Jeff, he's a great drummer. You never know. Those are two things that came out of that first gig I ever got in LA. There are two other contacts that I made through that gig that are kind of second removed, if you will. First off is this guy Matt Dennis. Matt Dennis is a great bassist that Patrick actually found on Craigslist, of all places, because Patrick needed a consistent bassist to play on his record. Philip and Dion can only do a couple of tracks, and we had, I think, 11 tracks to record, and so he wanted somebody else that could do the rest of the record. And he found this guy Matt Dennis. Matt Dennis is a bassist. I think he lives in Pasadena, and he plays with a bunch of bands around town, most of them original rock, one of which is a band called Fallen Riviera, and they just recently did a record on which I believe one or two tracks was produced by a guy named Ken Scott. Now, me being a production engineering guy, Ken Scott is sort of a god, because Ken Scott was an engineer for people like the Beatles, Elton John, Pink Floyd, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Duran Duran, the Jeff Beck Group. And he's also been a producer for David Bowie, Supertramp, Devo, Kansas, The Tubes, Level 42, etc., etc. And I was actually able to meet Ken Scott at one of Matt's gigs with Fallen Riviera, so that was totally cool. The other contact that I recently made through Patrick Abate is this guy Scott Earl. Scott Earl is a bassist, originally from Seattle, I believe. He now lives in Huntington Beach, and he needed a bunch of MIDI tracks done. And you may recall a past Jeff the Drummer episode about recording MIDI tracks. Well, that was for this guy, Scott Earl. Scott Earl, just a little background on him. He had a band in the, I think, late 80s or early 90s called TKO, and they were like a really popular metal band. He's also had groups called The Culprit. He had a band called The Bang Gang. All those bands have gone on to do lots of tours with major artists such as Metallica, Queensryche, Lita Ford, Dio, Ted Nugent, Foreigner, and Robin Trower. So Scott's been at he got to a pretty high level of the industry, and it was great working with him because he's got a lot of insights, a lot of stories. It's always awesome to hang with a guy like that and work with them because they just have a whole different perspective on the whole industry, and it helps you kind of, I don't know, kind of redigest a lot of the things that happen in the industry. So anyway, that kind of gives you an idea of what can come from just one gig. You know, all those contacts came from that one gig that I took when I first got to LA. Hopefully that exemplifies how important it is to get out there and meet people, because you never know. Just from that one guy, just from Patrick Abate, I've been able to create this whole network of musicians that I would have never met had it not been for him.